What's going on, good people? What's happening? We are on day 2. Chauvin trial officially began yesterday after voir dire for a couple weeks. And today, 6 different witnesses took the stand. And so I want to break it down. But I want to tell you the theme for primarily most of the day today and what stuck with me in my spirit. The gentleman, Mr. Williams, I want to say is Donald. And I apologize, I don't focus too much on the names of the witnesses because that's publicly available. In fact, they do a lot to try to not make it about the name of the witness because we don't want the witnesses targeted in any way. So I'll just give them kind of a generic name because that's how I roll with cases or things or situations. I'll just name it and give it a nickname. So the jiu-jitsu guy, right? Mr. Williams. And he took the stands as a continuance from yesterday. All day today, the primary purpose was setting the scene of what it was the day, May 25th of 2020. What happened? Who was there? What did they see? What didn't they see? And then how that fits into both the prosecution and ultimately the defense of Mr. Chauvin. And the biggest thing that you can tell from the defense side of the house, which is evident in the cross-examination, is going to be the themes that they continue to bring up. And the themes that were evident and strung through all 6 of the witnesses today was the notion of trying to paint each witness and their observations as you all were angry. You were an angry mob. You all were contributing to the situation as it was evolving, that the police had to fight you all off, that you all were angry enough that Mr. Chauvin had to respond the way that he responded. And so all of that is being built in a case. When a defense has a theme, a strategy, an affirmative defense, it's built by the witnesses, brick by brick, in each of their testimony. And then ideally you get to the end of your case and then now you've built your brick wall or whatever it is that you were building based on the witnesses. So today that is exactly what was attempting to happen. And so it picked up with this theme of, what people saw, what they experienced. And more than anything, what kept sitting in my spirit is like, there were 4 that were minors at the time. 2 were still minors now, and 2 are no longer minors now a year later. And the biggest thing to me was the vicarious trauma that these witnesses and all the observers, and now with social media to include everyone who's watched the tape, everyone who has family members that were there and experienced it firsthand, and then you have secondhand trauma, which is vicarious trauma. And the notion that in this nation, we have situations where you could be walking to the corner store or your children could be walking to the corner store and, God forbid, witness a murder, right? By the people that are sent to protect and serve, which is a total mind screw. And that was also a theme that was being run through all the witnesses on direct, was the effects that it had on them as they sat and observed the killing and the life leaving the body of Mr. George Floyd. And so as we begin to work through each one of those witnesses, the prosecution is laying out, what did you see? How did it affect you? And at one point, the jiu-jitsu dude, Mr. Williams, who began yesterday and completed today, he did not come to play. He was not having it. You could tell he wasn't having it the day of, and he was not having it today. He was crying at one point, a grown man on the stand crying. And the reason why this is important is because this is a normal, human, emotional, healthy response to experiencing trauma, to witnessing death, to witnessing murder, right? And now in the way our system's set up, now we put the observers on the stand, right? And now we're going to poke at you for your response to a trauma, right? Did you respond right? Were you angry? Were you frustrated? Why did you respond that way? Was everyone yelling? Why were you yelling? And then in different points of the video, Mr. Williams was cussing at the police after it got to a point toward the end of the 9 minutes, 29 seconds, that basically he was like, hey, like it was clear he had been dead for like 5 minutes. and was swearing at him, and then using those terms now against him on the stand and having to have him explain why he responded in the way in which he responded. I said, what kind of society do we have in which you literally now may or may not respond appropriately to a murder on your way down the block to grab a drink or a snack? So that's where we found ourselves today, was examining the crowd, examining what happened, what the officers are going to say occurred, and what they were, all, in the midst of. Now, the interesting thing here, though, is think about this. Thank God there's video. Because if there wasn't video, they'd have had these people with tiki torches and burning the whole place down. And in fact, in all of the testimony, and I'll go through the highlights of each one, but in all of them, there was never anyone aggressive. There was never anyone who approached or swung or threw anything, hit anyone, punched anyone. There was no threatening with violence. There was none of that. The most that someone got hyped up was the jiu-jitsu dude. And you could tell he was the one that was the most worked up, where you could see it and hear it, right? But even him, he stood back, and at one point the cop pushed him and he pushed the cop back, and that was the extent of that. But all of it today was building for the defense, for sure, building this notion of there's this rowdy crowd that they had to work around and while they were trying to arrest Mr. Floyd, which we know is not the case. And each witness, the prosecution did a great job, each witness broke down why, in fact, that is not the case. But that was the attempt. That was what they were trying to do all day today with these witnesses. So what really stuck out to me, and I'm just going to hit the highlights of what really stuck out to me. We got the jiu-jitsu dude, right? And again, grown man on the stand begins crying. And the prosecution says to him, like, what's going on? Because they played his 911 tape. Now, remember yesterday we found out the dispatcher called 911. Now the jiu-jitsu guy called 911. We're also going to hear about another woman who calls 911, calling the police on the police, right? That's where we at. So this gentleman's crying on the stand, and he basically says, when they said, why are you crying? He says, what do you do when the police are killing people? What do you do when the police are killing people? And I had to ask myself, you watch these things and you go, what if I'd have been in that space? What if I'm walking down the street? What will my reaction be if I had to witness something like that? And the biggest thing that also all of these witnesses said was basically, bottom line was that they were in shock. They were in disbelief, but all of them had guilt because they weren't able to save Mr. Floyd. Think about that. Like, they didn't kill this man. They didn't have nothing to do with that. And they all now carry the burden because of Mr. Chauvin and the law enforcement officers' actions. Well, I will tell you something. If you can YouTube Mr. Williams from today, his testimony with the defense counsel, he was not having it. Defense counsel was trying to paint him as angry, and he said, don't paint me as angry. I was a controlled professional. He said, I stayed within my emotions and I didn't do anything. And so, again, how would you control your emotions if you are thrust into a situation which you have no control over and someone is being harmed? And if you take action, because we've seen that where you take action against the police, the next thing you're the one who's dead. So that was what he struggled with to this day with that issue. And he was not having it with the defense attorney. He was not going to let him paint him as angry. He said, I was frustrated. I was desperate. Those are the terms you hear over and over and over again. These witnesses were frustrated and desperate. The next witness, kudos to my boy Williams, who said he grew in controlled professionalism. Listen, I just pray that if I am ever in a situation where I need to advocate, protect, or defend, that I will grow in controlled professionalism. Because I got to be honest, I'm not sure I'm there, y'all, but I bless this guy. Bless this guy. He grew in controlled professionalism. He said, don't paint me as angry. Right? So kudos to him. He is the real MVP of the day. He carried it. The next thing, we move on to the first witness of today. That was a carryover witness. The first witness for today was a young lady. Her name was Danella. She's 18 years old. She just turned 18 just a week ago. She was 17 last year. She began to describe the crowd's demeanors, actions, how people were reacting to witnessing a murder. Like, what is the proper reaction to that? I don't know, right? The other theme that came through was that the cops never took a pulse, never attempted to render medical assistance or attention. That was clear from all the witnesses. All the witnesses was he never moved off him until the ambulance arrived. He never checked his pulse. post, he never cared or tried to render aid, which is huge, right? Because all those are mitigating factors, right? Even if you, oops, like, oh man, I didn't realize he was going to be knocked out. Let me readjust. He didn't move. He wasn't shaken. He didn't do any of that. So the first witness, she basically just, again, the theme of having to defend your actions as a witness. You're on the stand and you have to be held accountable for their actions or inactions. So you're going to have to be responsible. If you put in a situation, you're going to have to speak for that, because now the law enforcement is going to use your actions or inaction on the way to the corner store as evidence as to why they had to then harm somebody else. Like, it's a twisted theory. Like, we have set up a system where it's like, if you respond with aggression or anger or swearing to someone hurting someone, now somehow you've got to respond for it. And that just kept sitting in my spirit. Like, how have we gotten to this backward place where protecting, advocating, defending what everyone should have done, which is what they were doing way more appropriately than I would have been. I would have been throwing things probably, and who knows, right? Like, but these people were very clear on they couldn't do anything because the police were doing something. So she cried on the stand, the 18-year-old, God bless her. And she says that she cries at night because she apologizes to George Floyd for not doing more. And she said she thinks about her dads and her brothers and her uncles because they're all black men. She said that because they are all black, she said that could have been any of them and I should have done more. This baby who just turned 18 is now carrying this burden with her into her today and her future. So we just pray for her as well. Her cousin, who is still a minor, so we don't need to talk about her name, but she walked up with Miss Danella to cut foods, and they were going to get snacks, y'all. How many times you've gone out with your family, you're going to get snacks? They were going to get snacks. And she testified that Chauvin stayed on George Floyd even after the medics told him to get off, that he was in such a zone that she said they had to tap him and like try to get him off, and that he wasn't moving. That was her recollection. She was sad and mad, she described. She said he was stopping George Floyd from breathing. Now, this is a baby, right? This is a young baby. And at this one, the defense attorney did not cross this witness, which I appreciate, because that's the only person he's extended that courtesy to, but he did not cross her because she is a baby and you don't get much traction from something like that. Don't go anywhere near it. It's not going to be worth it. The next witness was also a high school student, works in retail, was 17 last year, and she filmed the main video that most of us are familiar with. And so they had to call her to lay the foundation. She was going to get an aux cord, y'all, from this store, an aux cord. Her friend, Kaylin, who also testified, was there with her. They drove up in a Buick Century. She began crying on the stand because she felt hopeless, helpless, powerless, defenseless against these police officers. So think about that. That is another theme that carried through every time one of these individuals on the stand was crying, was because they felt helpless against the people paid to protect and serve us and didn't know what to do. And that is a terrifying moment, because if you try to put yourself in their shoes, what would you do? If the police are the people killing somebody, who do you call? What do you do? Do you swear? Do you throw something? Do you sit still? Do you pray? What are you going to do? And then know you're going to have to defend it later. And ultimately, Mr. Floyd died despite all of it. And it's just, it's terrible. So that was the third witness. She was again crying. She said the defendant, she also testified. Remember, we talked about the shimmy that jiu-jitsu guy told us about, how he was Chauvin shifting his weight to put all of it onto the neck of George Floyd. Well, each one of these witnesses also testified. Specifically, this young lady testified, witness number 3, he was putting more weight on George Floyd. His hands were in his pockets. So think about that. You're not distributing the weight. You are leaning in, right? So she testified to seeing him move his knee, again, that shimmying tactic. So they play her video, and then basically defense did the same thing. You were angry. They were yelling. They were coming for the police, right? You were doing this, doing that. So painting the crowd a certain way, but of course we have the video, so it is what it is, right? The fourth witness was just the friend of the girl who came with her, and she basically said the same thing. And finally closed it out, y'all. And again, I say, it is shocking to me when the universe brings people together to spaces like this to experiencing something, because remember, it was a shock that the jiu-jitsu guy who had the experience that he had with regard to use of force, specifically with law enforcement, security, training. This last witness, she happened to be strolling up on her day off, was an off-duty Minneapolis firefighter. She was an EMT, literally trained in first responder medical care, right? And how to handle emergency situations. So they bring her up, Miss Hansen. She happened to be, she testified, and I'm so glad she did this, showed up in her uniform today. Full on firefighter sis, bringing it in. And she again said, crying, she called the police after because she didn't know what to do and what she had just witnessed, and called the police on the police. So she is the third person we've heard done that. She indeed, as a first responder, was on the scene as well, and was one of the voices you will hear in any of the videos yelling to the police officers to check the pulse. She was doing, in her mind, triaging the situation, what needs to be done, assessing what it visually looked like, and trying to render aid verbally to tell the police officers, even if they wouldn't let her, but to go ahead and render aid. So there was someone on the scene who was trained to render aid to Mr. Floyd. And he still was not only did the police not render any aid to him once he became unconscious, there was someone else on the scene who could have rendered aid, who announced herself, put everyone on notice, who also was not allowed to render aid. So it just made it that much more of a shame. She was crying. She again says her pain comes from knowing that she could have helped. She could have done something, right? The officers, again, never took a pulse, and that was testified to again. She recorded after they weren't listening to her. She called the police after they weren't listening to her. And then after the ambulance, so this was interesting, took Mr. Floyd away, her firefighter squad finally showed up, and she knew the people that showed up. And so she knew that there was some sort of miscommunication because nothing should have taken that long. And so she blames that and says that that has to do with the police and dispatch somehow, because fire should have been there. They were 3 blocks away. So the delay in medical attention from the actual firefighters, right? The delay, she could testify to what should have happened by the police via a triage, even if they didn't want to allow her because she was rando walking up. But the fact is, she was verbally telling them they need to check, verbally doing things in which none of them were doing, y'all. So not only do we have someone on the scene who's saying, hey, you're using too much force. We got our jiu-jitsu guy. Now we have sister firefighter, and she literally is telling them, let me render aid. Okay, you render aid. Okay, somebody do something. And then ultimately points out on the stand that there was abnormal response time for this call. And so that's going to be looked into as why it was abnormal. Who messed up in the call? Now, whether or not that's going to save him, we don't know. But it just goes again to how many things could have been done to save Mr. Floyd. How many experts and random observers were on the scene with skill sets that were relevant to what was going on. To me, that is beyond believable. So she also said she stood around and called the police, and they said why and what was going on. And she said, I didn't know what else to do. When the police were killing someone, what do you do? She called the police. She said, I was worried about the other witnesses, and they asked her to explain. And she said, they were black men and there were still police officers on the scene, and I was afraid. She was indeed an ally, indeed aware of the climate, the circumstances, and the forces at play. Mr. Floyd was gone, ambulance was gone, but there were still people on the scene that they were couching as angry mobs and this and that and the other thing. And so she was afraid for who was still left and who was still on the scene with weapons. This is the world we are in, y'all. Like, this is legitimately what is going on 2020, right? So I thought that was interesting. She, then the cross-examination. Let me tell you something. The cross-examination. Hey, Ty. Hey, Tim. What's going on, y'all? The cross-examination between Sister Firefighter and the defense counsel. Whoo, she was not having it. And I can only imagine, you've gotten to this point, how many people you've had to say your story to, do your interviews, do all these things, relive it in your brain, how much therapy you got to go through. Again, pray and speak blessings over these witnesses, y'all, because not only did they witness the literal murder and lynching in the street, but now the process that it takes to try to get justice is soul crushing, right? So she's going through it back and forth, and he's kind of just laying the foundation. His basic thing with her, the defense counsel with Sister Firefighter, was basically telling her, like, if you were doing your job and fighting a fire, would you like somebody rolling up on you, trying to tell you how you're supposed to be doing your job? That was basically, in a nutshell, what he was trying to do. And she was like, well, I know how to do my job, so I wouldn't be distracted. So he was basically trying to make the point that you can't just roll up, Sister Off-Duty Firefighter, and tell us what we need to be doing on the scene, and we're supposed to give you some sort of credence. So making the point that, like, yeah, you may know this, yeah, you may be this, but you can't just roll up and jump in on the scene. And that's, I mean, regardless, at this point, when someone is dying, all the bets are off. Like, how is there a protocol when you're killing someone? And I think everyone was struggling to figure out in their own heads, what's the protocol when you're witnessing a murder? Like, straight up, like, what is it? You call the police, but the police here. You tell them, hey, he looks like he can't breathe. Render aid. Assist with triage. None of that's working. So again, he tried to use her to basically build, this is why the police was ignoring you, because in fact, you don't let anyone, when you're in your professional capacity, distract you. And in fact, Sister Off-Duty Firefighter, you were a distraction. That's what I took from that. But she was having none of that. She was cutting him off at every turn. She became hostile toward the end, in the sense, and I use hostile in the legal term, not really hostile, and I don't like calling witnesses that, but it just means that they're frustrated. She's been sitting there. She's not having any of the defense counsel's mess. She is tired of playing this game with him, and he's now pushing her, testing her on, you said this a year ago, and then on little nuances, making her feel like she wasn't telling the truth. So she was not having that at all. And he kept going with her and like sparring. It's like verbal sparring is what was happening. And so he asked her, so you were frustrated, you were angry on the scene. Everyone was angry, right? Because if you can paint an angry mob now, right, that gives police impunity to do whatever they have to do. And that's the society we live in. So if you witness murder, right, if you go back to Michael Brown, who was shot and killed in the street, and when the police showed up, they had to wrangle the neighborhood because they had all witnessed a murder, right? And then you pin it on the observers who were just living their life, and not on the actual culprits who are misusing their positions, right? Who are abusing their authority. That's what was going on. So basically, the defense counsel was trying to paint Sister Off-Duty Firefighter as an interference to the scene, that she would have been getting in the way, which is such BS, right? And then finally, toward the end, the judge had to send the jury out and basically left the witness, left the attorney, sent the jury out, and basically admonished the witness and was like, look, sis, you need to allow him to finish. You need to answer his questions and nothing else. Because what she began doing was, she could tell what he was trying to do. And so when he would ask a question, she would say, yes, and this is why this. And so she would add on to her answer. And so the defense counsel, this is really odd, would object to her own answers to his questions. Yes, Tim, you saw that. So basically he was like, she would answer and he would say objection, non-responsive, right? So and at this point now it has become a hostile kind of back and forth kind of thing going on, y'all. So the judge had to tell her, like, look, sis, I feel you. We've all been here all day, but you have to let him talk. And that is the challenge. Something that should evoke emotion that all of these people who testified felt and still feel to this day, they are given now the burden of figuring out where and how to place that within their daily lives, and now are on the stand and have to talk about it, and yet still have to be admonished on how you talk about it. And you can only do this, and you can only say that, and you can only do this. And so overall, it was just astonishing to me how many normal citizens were brought together in this day, May 25th, 2020, to respond to witnessing a murder. And now law enforcement or the defense can use somehow their actions that day to justify actions taken during the killing or the lack of providing response or medical aid to Mr. Floyd, and blames the crowd, right? I don't think it's going to get far. I think it's a tactic, right? When you don't have the facts, you don't have the facts, right? When you don't have the law, you don't have the law. And you maybe have the law very minimally in this case, but we know when that happens, you got to jump around and just pound on the table and yell. And so what he's going to do is just build up look over here, look at this person, look at this person, look at that person, this person. But I'll tell you, for the prosecution to have an off-duty firefighter, to have a guy trained in use of force and mixed martial arts, to have all these people with cell phones and videos. Again, at one point, the off-duty firefighter said, thank God there's video, right? Because when he was trying to characterize how she was in that crowd or how the crowd was, and she kept saying, I didn't say that. That's not what I'm saying. She was like, thank God there's video. And thank God there is video, right? And again, y'all, that was today. I think they can win. I think they think the prosecution believes they can win. I believe it. But you know what? There is nothing we can pin for sure anything on. And that is in the pit of my stomach. I am praying about it and really want to be hopeful. But you got to, this history, you got to go back to Rodney King. You got to go back to, that was the first video, right? Police brutality. And we know that story, right? So I think this is a good time for all of us to kind of get caught up on police brutality history, on how the trials roll out, what seems to be the pins and the issues in the trials, and what's the difference in this case. The difference in this case we have is clear cell phone beyond as many different views. We have people calling the police on the police. We have a very long length of time. We have the lack of a crazy crowd. They can paint them as that, but they weren't that. There's a video. They weren't no crazy crowd. So that was today. And again, just the notion that was weaved into that was how would you respond if you were an observer to that scene? What would your day have been like if you're just off duty, going to get you a drink, going to get some Skittles? You know what I'm saying? Going to get whatever, bag of Flamin' Hots. What, let's focus on today. Totally agree. Let's just focus on today, focus on what came out. Again, prosecution and the defense have to build brick by brick. Right? And the prosecution has the burden. They have to build brick by brick why it was intentional, why it was what it was. So we'll just stand by. We're going to keep watching. But I like to take morsels of what we can learn from it as humans, as Americans, as people, that this is our justice system. Where are the areas that we need to reform? Where are the areas that are problematic? Where are the areas as humans can we step up, right? And I am so proud all of these people stepped up, to the tune of they are still around a year later. And a lot of times you lose witnesses, you lose victims, because it's hard, because you get put and grilled and smacked around and flipped and run, all the things, right? And so thank God for them. Thank God for the people that told the line, that stood in that place for Mr. Floyd, and that are standing there today for him. So it takes a whole system, y'all. It takes a whole system. And then this is how, as citizens, that we begin to not only interject ourselves into the system, but learn how to reform it and what to do in the off seasons, right? What to do and who to vote for and how to do these things so that we can really reform what's going on. But anyway, that was today, y'all. The story of a crowd was today. So that was your case breakdown with Katie, and sending love and peace, man. Peace.